Mute it.
Yeah, I'm going to attempt to.
Oh, we're live.
Yay.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. This is Caitlin Miller. We are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons.
So many.
What this is an open conversation. Sorry, my wife broke her phone recently, and she's waiting for one to come out, get shipped to her. So I promised her I would leave my phone notifications on and check anytime I heard something in case she is trying to reach out to me from a stranger's phone or anything. This is just an open conversation. Today it's Caitlin and I. Usually we're joined by Marie Moran. She's not here this week. We'll miss her. We'll see her when she's back. We're just talking. The two of us are talking, and with any of you that are here. Those of you who are here, if you say anything in chat, we've got it up here. We'll see it and we'll respond. That's the point of communication, is that we're impacting one another. So that can be questions and answers, or it can be just conversing with one another or making jokes or whatever conversations are.
We love jokes. I love jokes.
We work at a small therapy and executive functioning coaching practice called Effective Artistry in Illinois. We specialize in utilizing a neurodiversity affirming approach. So we tend to talk about therapy, executive functioning, and neurodiversity related things on this, but we're just people, and you're people, and whatever you talk about will impact us, and we'll go where we go. We usually pick a topic in advance. We didn't do that today. Marie's the organized one that picks those things. So we're just I don't even know what we're gonna talk about, but no matter what we're talking about, if something's put in chat that takes us in a different direction, that's the priority. We'll go where we go. If you're interested in working with a therapist at Effective Artistry, we're only licensed to work with people who are in the state of Illinois. Our coaches can work with people anywhere in the world. I think that's mostly it.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. We'll get started. What are we going to talk about today?
My idea was friendships for neurodivergent people, and then we had another one. What was it? Earlier today.
We were talking about routines today, and what was it that you just said we should talk about at some point?
I thought it was friendships.
All right, before we went live, it doesn't matter. What do you want to talk about?
I'm a little bit more attracted to the idea of friendships for myself and for my neurodivergent clients, and I can kind of
tell me about that.
Okay, so I would say something that gets people caught up a lot is defining what a friendship is to them, what like a meaningful friendship would be. Then there's the process of making and finding friends, which almost, I would say, a lot of people on this planet now are pretty lonely.
Let's start with that first one, and we'll just take them one at a time.
Okay, Brandon, what is the archetype of a friend?
That's question and answer. No, I'm curious.
I would love that. Then I don't have to talk as much.
Yeah. Actually, one client in particular and I were just talking about this. They're talking about not having friends, and I asked something like, are there any people who would say that they are your friends, or who would say that you are their friend if I were to ask
them?
A
great question, Brandon.
Well, thank you. To which they said yes. So then it leads us to a conversation of what does it mean, right? And for this particular person, we ended up getting to like a certain criteria, which I won't go into detail about. But why does this idea of what makes a friendship, why did this come up for you?
I would say the place that gets clients stuck, I'll stick with clients, because how do I describe this? I think a lot of them feel on a day-to-day basis lonely. I don't know exactly how they would define lonely. And I think a lot of them can say, like, is there someone who I would call if I was in a crisis? Yes, like maybe one person. Are there people that I might go to a movie with, or go out to a bar with, or go to a concert with? Yes, but that like their experience of loneliness makes them feel as though they should have more friends and they would benefit from having more friends, but they don't know how to make the type of friends where they can like be like, wow, this person is I feel this friendship. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's very vague, which makes it very difficult.
Oh no.
Well, I mean, like I know it when I see it, right? Like that's not a very specific. You did list off some stuff that's much more that's like common, right? That people will say someone that I could call an emergency, someone that I can go hang out with at a concert, whatever. Another very common one is things like someone that I can hang out with and we can just watch TV. Or, we don't have to worry, I can do the things that I would do on my own with them present or stuff like that.
Yeah, the word like intimacy comes up for me, like that people feel like they're missing a sense of like, I don't know, platonic, intimate contact with someone who unconditionally loves them.
Well, that may or may not be true, but in the case that you're talking about, that's why I ask, like, why is it coming up, right? Because what you were saying is that what clients are talking about is not friendship but loneliness. The problem they're experiencing is that they're lonely, and then they're talking about friendship as a potential solution to loneliness, which I would say, yeah, it is. I mean, anything someone thinks is a potential solution to the problem they're experiencing, if it's about how they feel, is a potential solution. But there are other potential solutions as well. And so I think it's better to start by talking about loneliness first.
Yeah, and I think that feeds into being neurodivergent, because I think a lot of neurodivergent people, it's so hard to say statements like that, but I think a lot of people who are neurodivergent can feel like isolated or lonely. It feels like it was oftentimes exacerbated in the pandemic, and that usually they can find some sort of online community, but not like the type of, oh, my friend lives half a mile away and we can go hang out on a random Sunday, with no expectations, no plans, nothing. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And this is something that we're always working with clients on, right? Is that people will just generally, especially in our culture, I don't know how much this is a universal thing versus how much it's like specific to whatever elements of our culture or whatever, but they'll experience something unpleasant, something that they want to be different, but they don't say anything to anybody about that. They think about, well, why am I experiencing it? How can I fix it, etc. And they just try and resolve it on their own. And if they can't, then by the time they actually do talk to somebody else about it, usually at that point, or at least very commonly at that point, they're now talking about their struggles in implementing the solution they came up with themselves.
Yeah, and I think a lot of my clients come up with the solution, I feel lonely, dating is too hard, so I need to make more friends.
Right. So by the time they talk about it, it's how do I make friends? Which is a valid and useful thing to talk about, but people can get stuck on certain paths and we want to break them out of that. So we back up to, what is the problem? Well, I'm lonely. Because there are some things here. One thing I think, so a piece of research just came out like a month ago, which, research is good for what it's good for. And I, like everyone, only talk about the research that supports the things that I think. And it's limited, but it validates, or at least it backs up in a research-driven way, something that I've been talking about. And the research was, what the outcome showed was that people who identify as feeling lonely have thought patterns which are dissimilar, not only from people who identify as not being very lonely, but also differ from other people who identify as being lonely.
Oh.
Meaning that if someone says, I'm not very lonely, their thought patterns in this particular research were very similar to all the other people who were saying, I'm not very lonely. All the people who said, I am very lonely, their thought patterns were different from those people, but also from one another.
So is an easy way to say that people come up with various conclusions as to why they're lonely, or frameworks as to why they're lonely?
Well, I think to me, the conclusion is, like, we need to talk about what is loneliness. Because something that...
Oh, defining words again, Brandon?
Well, always. But something that, like, those same clients, or me, myself, or probably you, if I had to guess, it's very common for neurodivergent people to say, I'm lonely. And then for someone to say, well, you have like a bunch of friends and you're around people all the time or whatever. And they'll still be like, yeah, but nobody knows the real me, or nobody understands me, or I'm just masking, or whatever. Which is why I'm saying, even though developing friendships absolutely is obviously a thing that can help a person to feel less lonely, there is a type of feeling lonely that isn't addressed by having friends.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes actually even feels worse the more people you're around. That like I'm in the middle of a party and having a good time and everyone's having fun and I'm the life of the party and people like me being there, but on the inside I'm very lonely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to relate to that as well, I'll have clients talk about the process of unmasking and how they fear that as they unmask, they will lose all of their friends.
Unmasking is a thing to talk about for sure. It's an interesting concept.
I just think that's worth mentioning in this conversation with friendships, because I think a lot of neurodivergent people are like, I want to be more authentic, I want to unmask, but I'm afraid that these people will reject me.
And that is very worth talking about. And that's why I would want to know what the problem is first, right? Because then we go down a different path. Not that it's not worth talking about friendship, but if the problem is loneliness, then there are other things that are worth addressing. Like having for example, if we went the like more typical pattern and said, well, here are ways to make a friend, go to a social place, like choose a hobby that you like to engage with. I think
there was like a New York Times article that had the 4 steps to doing it, and it was so funny. It's like, position yourself in places where you can make like small conversation and then eventually continue to engage in small talk.
Which if we did that, then anybody who followed that process and thereby made a friend, quote unquote, whatever that means, is very likely to say, well, I got this friend by masking.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
By like following the rules of how to get a friend. And now I can't unmask with them or I'll lose that friendship. So loneliness is about the way that you think and feel in relationship to other people. So by definition, anyone who identifies as neurodivergent is going to feel lonelier than people who don't on average, right? Like it's not that there's never been a person who would say they're neurotypical that feels lonelier than neurodivergent. But that's identifying as neurodivergent is in and of itself saying, I am aware that there are ways in which I am different from most other people that are impactful, not just cosmetic or meaning, like actually meaningful differences. And that's true of everybody, but not everybody identifies that or is aware of it in that way. And the specific impact and the specific differences vary from person to person. So I'm not trying to take that away. I'm just saying there is no monolith out there of quote unquote normal people and they're all the same as each other. Even though there is statistically, people who are closer together in more ways or on average or whatever. So some of it has to be dealt with in that way, I think. That in existential theory, which I love, there's the 4 universal fears, existential fears. The fear of death, and they're universal, meaning everyone experiences them. You have to, if you are a human, you must experience them, is the idea. Fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, fear of freedom, and fear of isolation. And in existential philosophy, the fear of isolation, what that's referring to is the idea that my internal experience, the things that I am, everything in my consciousness, everything I think and feel and observe, and everything on the inside is completely separate from anything you can observe. And the same is true for you. That my conscious experience, everything in my universe from the moment I became conscious until the moment it's over, has zero overlap with everything in your conscious experience. Now, we communicate, we use language and other, the way I would use language is just any symbolic representation. So it would be all language. But people will generally, like the correct dictionary definition of language is about a shared set of symbols. So I'm trying to be clear. When I use language, I mean any symbolic representation, not like the English language. So it's not just verbal, it's not just words, it's, anything that's communicative. That for me to communicate anything to you, the process I'm actually engaging in is making guesses about how you will be impacted by the things that I do. And then choosing what I'm doing based on how I'm trying to evoke in your conscious experience the thing I'm trying to get across. Which is very needlessly complicated, I suppose.
I feel like is part of the point you're getting to that by some people's definition of loneliness, part of being a human being and having a unique conscious experience is innately lonely, and so therefore we're all lonely.
Just like the fear of death or whatever, it's universal.
Yeah.
We all are isolated from one another. We cannot be fully understood.
Yeah.
Depending on, like if you're trying to say, I want someone else to know exactly what I mean, that's not possible.
So then are you saying that neurodivergent people, because they feel on average different than the average person, will be more likely to feel misunderstood, which will make them more isolated, which will make them feel more lonely?
Regardless of whether they are observably isolated, they will feel more lonely.
Yeah.
Like loneliness is an emotional, like I'm using all kinds of philosophy terms. I was going to say a phenomenological state, a state of being, of reality that is present in a given moment, right? Like if I would say I'm a lonely person or I am lonely, that doesn't mean every moment of the day I'm feeling lonely. Just like if I say I'm sad, it doesn't mean I never have a moment where I'm not sad.
I guess maybe part of my bias is I get kind of caught up in the binary of people being lonely people or not lonely people, and I think that's part of how I'm conceptualizing my clients, and maybe that's getting both of us.
Well, that's how they're conceptualizing themselves, as evidenced by the fact that they're coming to you and saying, I am lonely because I don't have friends, and I don't have friends because I don't know how to have friends, so teach me how to have friends.
So what would you say is advantageous about pointing out that loneliness is an emotion?
The same way that we would want to deal, like if someone were to say, I'm sad because I'm a sad person, what do we do about that? Right? Like that locks
then you're
in
just
patterns,
sad forever, sort of.
Which is what I'm talking about. Like I have said that. I've been that person who in college, the door to the place that I live was never locked, and I'd come home and there'd be 15 people. It was the hub, and I was the life of the party, and I'd put people together, and and I'd still like cry in bed at night being like, nobody knows the real me. No one cares about the real
Brandon!
me. Not every night, but it happened.
Yeah.
I'm saying that when there's an element of this that is independent of how much you're actually interacting with other people.
Yeah.
And so part of that still goes back to friendship and like the type of friendship or the type of interaction we're talking about. But the point I'm trying to make is that, like the fear of death, it is universal. Everyone will experience it. Will have an unpleasant experience of it. And mostly I don't think about dying, right? Like when I do, I don't like it, especially the more detail, the more like I'm trying to be accurate about when I start to think about not seeing my kids again or whatever, even saying it makes me feel in this moment very, in a way I don't like, whatever you want to, sadness or whatever.
Yeah.
And some people, by their report, experience that fear of death, think about death, and experience that sadness and whatever, anxiety and whatever, in response to their thinking about it far more frequently than other people, or more intensely, or both.
Yeah.
The same is true for isolation, or meaninglessness, or freedom, right? Any of the like universal fears. Just because we all have it, we all don't like it, doesn't mean we all experience it the same way.
Yeah.
So a person who is a lonely person is a person who is experiencing that more frequently and or more intensely. But even that is a comparison against what I would say other people. The act of identifying myself as a lonely person is a thing that distinguishes me from normal people and thus makes me feel more lonely.
Yeah.
So some of this is just about awareness. Some people don't think about or are unaware of the fact, generally, that other people don't understand them, right? Like, we're not all thinking about that all the time. None of us think about it all the time.
Yeah.
But some people might roll around just being like, yeah, everybody understands me, and if they don't, it's their fault. They don't get it. I don't think there's anybody who never thinks, that people misunderstand them and that they're isolating someone.
Or if they feel misunderstood, they're just like, that's that other person, like what you just said, that's that other person's problem, or it doesn't matter.
By the way, is a thing that neurodivergent people do all the time. It's a huge part of the benefit a lot of people get from identifying as neurodivergent is saying, well, they don't get me because they don't understand I'm neurodivergent and they're not.
Do you think that's mostly advantageous?
It depends on the context. It's a way of not feeling bad about it.
Yeah.
If you become aware that someone misunderstood you, most of the time in this culture, people are going to go to the second step of whose fault is it? Did I say it wrong or did they interpret it wrong? Did I misspeak or they misunderstood? And if I think I misspoke, I'm going to tend to feel bad again in our culture. So if I can say, no, they misunderstood, it still doesn't change the fact that the miscommunication happened and whatever problem it caused was caused. But at least now I don't have to think, oh, I'm doomed to always experience this because it's my fault. So it'll happen with everybody no matter what.
Yeah.
It's that person's fault, so I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Well, I guess this might be a bit of a tangent, but a trend that I'm noticing in various ways since the beginning of the pandemic is that the average person on this planet seems to feel more lonely than they did before the pandemic. And I think a decent amount of them might describe it as like losing a level of quality in their friendships, like that maybe they still technically have people they would call friends.
Why are you saying it as like people on this planet? Why project it onto the average or universal?
Because I think it's a societal crisis, and I think that neurodivergent people are more affected by it. Why would that matter?
Why would it matter if it's applying to everybody or not?
Because I think there might be factors outside of, and I don't think you're saying this, but factors outside of just neurodivergence, like political climate and globalization and technological advances and social media and workplaces getting,
but going down that path is still going down the path of trying to find something to blame for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is only useful insofar as if we identify something to blame as something we can do something about.
Mm-hmm.
If we blame it on the existence of social media, what are you supposed to do about that?
Change the way you're interacting with social media?
But that would then just come back to changing your patterns of behavior and the information you're exposed to and who you're engaging with. Yeah. You can't change that people use social media.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, if I was giving the impression that neurodivergence is the only thing impacting loneliness.
Oh, you totally weren't giving that impression.
Yeah, there's, as with all these things, infinite variables because we could break it down, uncountably infinite. We can break it down in any kind of way.
I guess part of what I think the point I'm trying to make is that when I think about my own sense of loneliness, I feel like I can kind of see it in other people as well, and it's
And don't
sad.
You feel a little less lonely when you see it in other people? You get sad, but not as lonely.
It actually, I think the amount of sadness it adds is worse than the
I'm not saying that,
amount of loneliness
but you do
it
get
reduces.
less lonely.
Yes, I do.
So that's what I'm saying. When you make a statement of like the average person on this planet or whatever, that's an indication that a person has found some relief in finding similarity between them and other people.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with identifying as neurodivergent. I'm like other neurodivergent people in some way, so that makes me feel less alone.
Well, then is loneliness not the problem then? Because I feel like,
Well, loneliness, to me, at the end of the day, every problem is some version of some experience I'm having that I don't like. And then it's various things from there. And so loneliness is the problem in that it is an experience I am having that I don't like. Mm-hmm. And I would distinguish it, and most people who are using that language would distinguish it from being sad or tired or in pain. Like it's a particular version of a thing I don't like, and therefore particular things will help with it.
So then is another way to say it, like, I'm not sure what quite is going on, but I want to have more friends.
No.
I had a feeling I missed that one.
Unless we did a lot of work on defining what we mean by friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because if what I mean by friends, if I'm looking for like some correct definition of it or some step-by-step process of making friends, then the act of being physically around other people where I feel dissimilar to them makes me feel more lonely. Mm-hmm. What makes me feel less lonely is to feel as though I have more in common with other people. Mm-hmm. And to be around other people is one way that can happen, especially if you're around other people that you feel like you have a lot in common with, and you communicate and you get along and you share interests. But it's the idea, the understanding, the belief that I am not so uniquely out there and ununderstandable, right? Like that it is impossible to understand me. The less I feel that, the less lonely I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about just having friends or being around people unless we're talking about a particular thing. And there are ways to address it that don't have anything to do with being with people physically. And I think that in particular for neurodivergent people is important because this is part of where it gets problematic when people use that medical model, but just apply neurodiversity language as neurodivergent versus neurotypical. Every time you think that, you become lonelier. Because in thinking that, you're saying most people are completely different from me in like a quantifiable, unchangeable, destined from birth or before kind of a way. And there's nothing I can do about it. That solves other problems, but it makes loneliness worse. And so I think it is important, especially for neurodivergent people, a huge amount of the time, the distress that results from the difference between what I think I am or what I'm experiencing and what I would prefer is coming a lot more from what I think is possible and therefore the thing I would prefer, right? Like if I think everybody else never gets sick, then when I get sick, I'm going to feel way more miserable than if I understand that everybody gets sick sometimes. Doesn't mean that I'm not sick right now and that there's nothing worth being upset or complaining or that I should just shrug it off because it happens to everybody, but it addresses the loneliness element of it.
I feel like what you're trying to say in a very complicated way with lots of big words is that everyone feels lonely. So although your loneliness is valid, you're not alone in your loneliness.
That's not what I'm trying to say, although that is that is part of what I'm saying and would theoretically make people feel less lonely to know that they're not alone.
I think if I was your client in that circumstance, I would say, Brandon, you're really cool and thanks, but how can I feel less lonely?
Well, honestly, part of what makes therapy work when it works is just that, feeling as though the therapist understands you a little bit or is similar to you in certain ways, or it is the act of going to therapy is a thing that makes you feel less lonely.
Well, but then I'll have clients say, I really like you, but I also want to have friends.
Right.
And I totally want them to have friends.
That's where we would come back around to where we started. But that's why I want to address the loneliness. That's why whenever someone says, I want X, I say, why? What is it about X that you think would be preferable to what you have or whatever?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're already there at the initial problem. And you'll know that they're there when they're saying either, I don't know, I just don't like it, or some version of I don't like it, I want it to be different. I enjoy it, I don't enjoy it. Those are the base level things. But anything with rationale or reasoning behind it means there was something that either hurt or was pleasurable, and they're trying to make changes in order to get less of the hurt or more of the pleasurable, whatever. Yeah. And then they've gone on to other theories. But we'd still come back around. I always want to address their actual question. I just want to, because otherwise there's danger, right? Especially with neurodivergent people. If I say, okay, we'll do this, and this, especially this is more in line with what we would stereotypically consider to be autistic traits, that someone would be like, okay,
why we keep talking about autism.
1, 2, 3, 4, got it. I'm going to go do those things. And then I go do them and then it doesn't work. And then I'm like, oh no, I'm doing it wrong still, because there must be some rule by which all this operates and I just need to learn what it is.
Yeah.
But we'd still get back around to it. I just would want to clarify all that. And then we say, okay, so what do you mean by a friend then?
I think the average response, if I'm combining my response with my client's responses, would be something like a person who I genuinely enjoy being around. Because they might say oh, I have...
And here's what I would say. Is there anyone that you only ever enjoy being around? That no matter what?
They would say, don't infantilize me.
Well, I don't know how that's an infantilizer. I would then ask, what do you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
maybe they would say something like, the vast majority of times I'm around them, I enjoy it. Because I feel like a really good friend, you'll have some times when maybe it doesn't work out or whatever, but most of the time I feel...
Well, how about this? when you are spending time with a friend, a person in whose company you are experiencing joy, right?
Sure.
But you're not experiencing joy this time.
Mm-hmm.
What other things tend to have changed? That the person didn't change. So what else changed that shifted it from I enjoy being in their company to right now, it's unpleasant being in their company?
I would say mostly in the presence of conflict, like if there's a conflict in the relationship and it needs to be resolved.
Great. So then we would want to talk about communication and how to resolve conflict and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I don't know why I'm testing you.
Well, I'm getting lost because I'm trying to think of like, I feel like another thing that could be said is I want this, okay, curveball, this goes back to routines, but I feel like a lot of people would say something like, I actually just had someone say this to me. I work 9 to 5, I work 40 hours during the week. I mostly don't have time to hang out with people after. But on the weekends, I want to hang out with at least one person or one group of people on Saturday and one person or one group of people on Sunday. And if I'm not doing that, I feel lonely, isolated, like a loser, like...
And I would say, and if you do it, do you then not feel lonely and isolated? And
then this particular client would say, I feel less isolated, I feel less lonely, but I don't have like the battery to do Saturday and Sunday.
So what is one of the variables?
Burnt out.
What is one of the variables that dictates whether or not you're enjoying being in the presence of someone else is how
physical
energy,
you are. Health, burnout.
I mean, I would call it social energy, because of how
I
divide energy up. But yes, like I love my wife. I love being in her presence. Mm-hmm. And when we are fighting, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but I am not aware of any. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say nigh universally, one or both of us is exhausted. Mm-hmm. That part of what makes being in someone else's presence enjoyable is how you are feeling. Another thing is what the two of you are doing, the context in which you find yourselves, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so when people zero in on, I just need to find the right person, and that will solve the problem, that's fine, because some people it's going to work a lot. But obviously, I have some people I'm friends and most people I'm not. Not that I'm unfriendly, but I just don't know most people. So I'm not saying that. It's just I don't want people to get the wrong impression, especially the kind of neurodivergent person who is very likely to fixate on rules and routines and habits as if I do A, B, C, and D, then everything will be perfect. And then they do it, and then everything's not perfect. Mm-hmm. There's so much danger down that path of saying, oh my gosh, I'm doing it wrong. Or there's something even more weird and different about me that even the stuff that works for other neurodivergent people doesn't work for me, and causes all kinds of problems. And more importantly than that, even though there are risks of that, the thing is, I want you to be able to play around with all of the variables. When you're lonely, sometimes, I want to make some friends. Depends on the context. Sometimes, no, I have friends. I just want to change things around so that I'm actually able to engage with them more. Or I have friends, but we're in a fight and I want to be able to resolve that fight. Or whatever, various different things. Because if people fixate on one potential solution, like the common version that I use of this all the time is when someone's exhausted all the time and the one solution they come up with is, I got to go to bed earlier. And then they mostly don't. Mm-hmm. And then instead of saying, what else could I do? They say, dang it, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get myself to go? I know everything would be better if I could just get myself to go to bed earlier, and I can't. And they fixate on that. And there's all these other things that could be done that would be much less costly, at least theoretically, in given context or whatever.
I'm going to give you an example that I think is another tangent, and I apologize because this is the way my brain is working today. So what I'll have, so I'll have clients who say, I'm lonely, I need to make new friends. Then they'll do something like I'm trying to not use specific, take an art class or something.
Yeah.
And then they'll go to the art class and they might enjoy making art around other people who are making art, but they won't become like a best friend or someone they see outside of the art class or all of these things. And then they'll say something like, okay, I'm technically less physically alone because I'm doing, or like a softball league or like a volleyball league or whatever. I have clients, and especially like queer stuff is super fun. Like I play like queer volleyball every Sunday morning or whatever. But yeah, so I just got very distracted. So they essentially feel less alone in the moment. They feel like they have more activities and they like that, but they're not like, oh, this person will become my best friend, or this person I will talk to every day, or if my mother dies tomorrow, I will call this person and cry on their shoulder. Like, and so then they're just like, I still feel lonely and I still have no friends, even though I do things around people all the time.
Right. Because something that is very common for people in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
and it's possible that it is more common or more intense with neurodivergent people, but I wouldn't speak to that with any certainty,
Mm-hmm.
is the misunderstanding, the inaccurate belief that you can do a thing perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that in order to not be lonely, I must never feel lonely. And therefore, anything I do, which makes me feel less lonely, I don't feel lonely when I'm doing it. I'm being more active. I'm meeting more people.
Mm-hmm.
If at any point after that, I still feel lonely, I'm like, dang it didn't work.
Well, so I think that person would say, Brandon, that's a great point. But I think the type of loneliness I'm trying to like satiate or whatever, get rid of, is like the type of friendship that feels like this might last a while, and I feel like deeply understood.
Right. And that's about thoughts and feelings, right? Like your projection of the future. Like theoretically, if I could convince that client that one of their current friendships will last a long time, it would just be their belief has shifted now, but now all of a sudden they're not concerned. Which isn't, does that make sense?
Can you repeat that?
That if they're saying what I want is to feel like I have the kind of relationship that will last a long time, if I could convince them theoretically that relationship will last a long time, now they feel better, even though nothing has actually changed.
Well, I'm thinking of one particular client, and I think they would say something like, the people I oftentimes hang out with would technically be my friend for a while, and they do technically like me, but I'm not really liking them so much. And so I'm not really interested in being their friend for a while.
Then what are we talking about?
Autism? I'm glad that made you laugh.
Well, in that case, I guess we could say that person is masking, because again, they're saying, I must have friends in a certain way and socialize in a certain way, and then everything will be better.
Mm-hmm.
Then they do it all, and it's not all better. And they're like, well, what's wrong? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. That's why we don't go down that path. Mm-hmm. Now, what I would say is none of this is perfectly resolvable. Like for ADHDers and neurodivergent people in general, but specifically ADHDers, if you ask them something like, have you ever had an organizational system that works for you? They will almost universally say, no, nothing has ever worked for me. Mm-hmm. When what has actually happened is that they have tried many, many, many different organizational systems, many different ways of keeping a calendar, whatever. And that many of those, if not most or all of them, did help them in some way for some period of time. Mm-hmm. But they have defined it. In order for an organizational system to consider to be working for me, it must always work forever. Mm-hmm. So even if something worked for me for 2 months, but then I fell off of it and forgot and didn't get back to it, that's another thing that didn't work. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, except the problem is, if you're feeling that lonely, just like if you're feeling exhausted all the time or scattered and disorganized all the time, what do you think the chance is that you're going to find one thing you can do, just one thing that's going to change it? So now you went from I'm exhausted all the time to, I'm energized all the time, or I'm lonely all the time to I'm never lonely.
I think what a lot of my neurodivergent clients come to is some version of, if I just unmask for long enough and I continue to expose myself to people, then eventually I will have friendships with people who I am being authentic with.
True, unless you're exhausted all the time or sad all the time. Mm-hmm. In which case, it doesn't matter who you meet. You're not going to be reaching out to them or getting together with them or communicating with them, because those are things that take resources. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying there's more. And that, by the way, would be my like generic advice for meeting a friend is two things. Do things that you enjoy doing in a place where it is visible. And that could mean taking a class or joining a league or whatever. Or it could mean painting al fresco in the park or whatever. That's what it's called, right? No,
plein
not
air.
al fresco, plein air.
Mm-hmm.
Al fresco is on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Or going hiking on a public trail or whatever. Just do something you enjoy in a place where you are visible to other people. A version of that I like to call friend bait.
That's so funny.
Is wearing t-shirts with band logos that you like on them. You know, like a thing that, or video games that you like, or getting tattoos with quotes and or making references to pop culture, like a lot of very neurodivergent stuff we're talking about here, where it's, I'm doing a thing which if a person does not recognize or like the thing that I am doing, it's innocuous, they're unlikely to, it's not going to cause them to want to harm me. But if they recognize it, they might go out of their way to say, oh, I love Bleach too, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
is Bleach a band?
It's an anime.
Oh, okay, because I was like, it would be very funny if you're literally talking about the chemical compound of bleach.
Well, that could work too. I mean, puns and sarcasm and like reference, all these things are little tests, right? That if, and here's a very common, this used to be a lot more niche a long time ago, but now it's very mainstream, that if someone at some point in a conversation, we're just talking about like how hard it is to find a job or whatever, and I say, well, do or do not, there is no try or whatever, then only the people who know Star Wars well enough are going to be like, oh, you know, and we forge a connection there. So that would all fall under do things that you enjoy in places where you are visible, contexts in which you are visible, because, you know, doing it online or whatever.
And I think my client might say something like, how important is it, Brandon, to enjoy the thing?
Very.
Yeah.
That's the most important part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because otherwise what? You've now made friends who really like doing a thing that you don't enjoy, and your friendship is built around doing a thing that you don't enjoy.
Well, and I'll have clients who are like between, I don't know, 21 and 30 or something, who feel as though going to bars or doing the whole like partying scene on the weekends is what they have to do. And then they're like, all these people, all they want to do is just drink and party. And I think it's stupid.
You know what's hilarious about that is that when people are saying things like that, usually, not always, but usually I can say something like, well, aren't you pretending like that's all you want to do as well? Aren't you deliberately giving the impression to them on purpose because you think it's all they want? So you are purposefully trying to give them the impression that it's all that you want too. And they'll usually say yes. And then I'll say, how do you know they're not doing the exact same thing?
I think that client would say, because they're basic blanks.
And this is not an issue about friendship. This is an issue of how that person views people. That someone else who's doing exactly what you're doing, going out and partying and drinking,
acting similar.
Right. It's just a version of them judging themselves.
Yeah.
Like, how can, if you are flawlessly giving everyone the impression that you love this, even though you secretly think it's stupid, how are you so sure that they don't also secretly think it's stupid and they're also pretending like you are?
So then do they just say one night at a bar, I hate this and I think it's stupid. Does anyone else want to raise their hands and you can be my friend?
But sure, give it a shot. Because what do you have to lose?
Yeah, exactly.
You stop hanging out with people that only want to do stuff that you hate? Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a little drastic. I think you can
It would be very funny though.
I think you can move in that direction by just saying things like, oh, I'm exhausted. Or, you know what? I had a long week. Do you want to just get together at the restaurant and have a couple drinks and have a meal instead of going out to the club? Or, you know, like there are many, many shades in between pretending as though I love this and want to do it all the time, even though I think it's stupid, and telling everybody that they're idiots for enjoying the thing that they enjoy.
Yeah.
But again, it sounds like this person is trying to follow rules, and that they
follow a lot of rules.
They're confident, as many neurodivergent people are, that that life does operate in accordance with a set of rules, some of which I know and some of which I don't. But if I learn all the proper rules and follow them, then my life will be perfect and I will never be tired or sad or lonely of any kind.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the kind of gross phrase of like hacks. I'm going to hack life, productivity hacks.
I get what you mean, but there's utility with every phrase.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I just did. So I said 2 generic pieces of advice. One would be do things you enjoy, and yes, you have to enjoy it. Otherwise, what is the point of the friendship? That's why I wouldn't jump straight into a conversation about how do I make friends. I could make a million friends by going and talking to every. You are a social butterfly, chameleon, whatever, right?
I don't know, Brandon.
What did you say they voted you in high school?
No, we're skipping.
Okay.
Skipping.
But a lot of neurodivergent people will say things like, in fact, a lot of very lonely people will say things like, I fit in with everybody. I didn't have a clique because I could sit at any table in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just adopt the mannerisms and talk about what they want to talk about and whatever. And yeah, you can make a lot of friends like that.
Mm-hmm.
But does that solve you feeling lonely? No. Separately, it also is likely to make you more, it's more likely that you will become somebody who more and more and more feels lonely on average, because the exposure to all the different types of things, as opposed to reinforcing a particular set of beliefs and practices and whatever, is going to make you realize how different everyone is from everyone and how different you are from everyone and whatever. Where if you only hang out with people who do and say and look and whatever, all the same things you do, then you're more likely to feel like, yeah, everybody's the same, and therefore less lonely.
So then does neurodivergence as a paradigm just like dissolve?
This, I still want to resolve some of the friendship stuff, but because this has the possibility of taking us in a different direction. Yes, there is no such thing as neurotypical. There is no such thing as a neurotypical individual.
Mm-hmm.
Just like there is no such thing as an average person. Mm-hmm. There is an amalgamation, a statistical model. Like, it is useful to talk about what is normal. No individual person is normal, which is what neurodiversity is. The view of neurodiversity, the paradigm is everyone has a different brain and everyone is different. Mm-hmm. That at least some of the ways in which every person is unique, completely different from every other person, are due in part at least to the differences in their neurobiology. Mm-hmm. That's what neurodiversity says at its core. The idea that some people are neurodivergent and some are neurotypical is not the neurodiversity paradigm. It is still useful to be able to say, I am neurodivergent, mm-hmm. but it doesn't, if you're thinking of that as like some kind of quantification, like some measurable way to distinguish some people are and some people are not, mm-hmm. as a binary thing, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But if you're just using it like in the way that I might say, oh, I'm tall, which isn't a quantifiable thing, it's just as compared to most people, I am taller than mm-hmm. most people, then it's useful. But if I try to say some people are tall and some people are short, no, that's not how it works. And that causes you problems if you start to think that way.
Yeah. What was this more stuff about friends?
So 2 things.
Because we have 10 minutes.
2 things you enjoy in places where you're visible. And the other is work on being happy. Do you want friends that are happy or friends that are miserable? Do you think other people want friends that are happy or friends that are miserable? Do you want to be friends with people that you're never sure if they're hanging out with you, even though it's a burden to them, but they're forcing themselves to do it? Mm-hmm. Do you think anybody wants to hang out with you if you're forcing yourself to hang out with them, even though it's a burden to you?
So then I could say to a neurodivergent, lonely, isolated, sad client that improving their experience of happiness, how often they experience it, that will make it easier and more likely for them to have meaningful friendships?
Yes. Not only easier and more likely, inevitably.
Because if they walk around smiling enough, someone will say, wow, you have a nice smile. I want to be your friend.
No, because that might happen. But no, because if you are happy, which mm-hmm. by definition, if you are happy in some broad way, right, or happier in some broad way, mm-hmm. that also means you are more rested and less exhausted. You have more energy to do things and talk to people and go places and engage with stuff. Mm-hmm. That you're not sad and miserable and struggling all the time, which is not to say that that's a bad thing or a characteristic or a personality trait. It's none of those things. It's just to say, when you are feeling happy, here, Thought experiment. Everybody listening to this, think of your best friends in your life. Think about when you met them and when that friendship became such a strong friendship. Were you generally decently happy at that point in your life?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And did you meet those people by following certain steps about how to go meet people, or did they just happen to be people who were around you at a period in your life when you were generally doing pretty okay? Neurodivergent people do have a tendency to think that the solution to all their problems must entail some work and misery on their part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lonely. The way to solve that should be to force myself to do stuff that I don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I am sad. The way to solve that is force myself to do stuff I don't want to do. I'm disorganized and I'm falling behind, and the way to solve that is to force myself to do stuff that I don't think works and I don't like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Well, and I'm kind of thinking of the inverse of that, because I have a client who has what I would perceive as like an extensive list of amazing people in their life with really wonderful connections with them. And they will get very, very sad and spiral and just feel like the most isolated person on earth. And they could probably,
Which goes back to their
have like
other
the
variables.
most interesting dinner party that it should be like, you know, recorded and like made into a television show because their friends are so interesting, like that kind of thing of like, wow. So
yeah,
yeah,
there are other variables than the people you're hanging out with and the things that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I will hang out with the same group of, there was a time in my life at the beginning of the pandemic where I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with my group of friends every week without fail for like a year and a half, which was just ridiculous for me. You know, we'd never done a campaign for longer than like 6 or 7 sessions spread out like once a month or whatever.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and it was great. And I looked forward to it, and I was making it happen. I was calling and talking and texting with people, and I was thinking about stuff, and we did 2 different campaigns. I put all this thought and effort and energy.
Were you
the
dungeon master?
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Of course. That's just my personality. How am I not going to be?
I feel like all of my clients who play D&D, they're almost all dungeon masters as well.
Really? That's interesting. And I mean, the group is, you know, my brother, my best friend from when I was in middle school, my best friend from when I was in college, my best friend from when I was married, you know, like,
yeah,
it's just all my friends throughout my life, and I make them hang out with each other.
Yeah.
Because that's a very neurodivergent thing. You already have some friends.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on that first.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's going poorly, it's likely either a communication thing
Mm-hmm.
or you're not doing well in
Mm-hmm.
other ways. Because the second part of that story is things change for various reasons to the point where I started to dread having to go to D&D.
Really?
Yeah, because I was exhausted. And it fell apart because I wasn't the one making it happen,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't leading everything. And not that anybody else should have to. I'm not complaining. I'm saying it was a thing I made happen. And then we had a third child, and I was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And I started a business, and I was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thought of like, oh, I know I love hanging out with my friends, and it'll probably be fun, but I'm so tired. I just want to sit on the couch and not have to talk to anybody tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And then you miss a week, and then 4, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's been months since we played, and you know, there are other variables.
I feel like I could imagine myself, and I know this sounds very salty, but being upset that no one else picked it up and became the master.
Why would they? I'm the one who made it happen.
I know.
Why is it their job to take over a thing
know.
I made happen?
That's why it's an unfair
And actually,
fight.
someone else did pick it up and
Mm-hmm.
wants to be playing a lot more and is the DM and just doesn't have the same relationship I have with everybody and doesn't have the same personality and way of communicating that he's going to be calling and texting people and like
Mm-hmm.
getting them excited about their characters and talking about backstory. There was one weekend where my family went out of town without me because I had to stay and work at one point. I was wearing a little Fitbit watch at the time. And on a Saturday, I didn't leave my house, but I walked 20 miles just pacing back and forth on the phone for like 12 straight hours, talking to one and the next about their stories and all these different things.
Wow.
I made maps and all this stuff. I had the energy for it at that point. And I would still enjoy it. I just don't have the resources for it. So if I find the right friend, things will be better is a lot like if I find the right self-help system or the right binder or the right whatever, things will be better. It's not that it's never true, but it is also often something that people are looking for an external solution to a problem that just doesn't. If I make enough money, then I'll be happy. If I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it is something that moves you more in that direction. But this is super oversimplified. But if you are exhausted, you're not going to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter who you're hanging out with or what you're doing. You're exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in pain, you're not going to be
And
happy.
I feel like a lot of my conversations with clients will end up being usually people resonate with this term, but talking about burnout in some way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like your one client that you mentioned, then I come up with, okay, well, if I hang out with people in a certain way, then it'll be better. Which that part's great. Mm-hmm. Coming up with ideas of, if I change this, things will be better. That part's great. Then you do it. That part's great. Mm-hmm. Then you see, okay, no, didn't work. Mm-hmm. That part's great. You observed it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Then you keep trying the same solution. That part's not so great.
Yeah.
You tried it, it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Why not just say, maybe I am more of like a hang out with one person a week, or hang out with people on Saturday and nobody on Sunday, or vice versa. Or maybe on the weekend, I just assess and say, is this the kind of week where I want to do both days or one day? Mm-hmm. Or maybe I let myself cancel with people if I'm a little too tired, and mm-hmm. which people might not do because they feel bad about, mm-hmm. It's not that simple.
On this magical day, we have to end this very soon.
Yeah. All right. Let me give some brief thoughts on, because I do want to answer like the actual questions people would have. So I gave the generic advice: do stuff you would like in place that, mm-hmm. and work on just broadly having more resources available to you, time, energy, attention, etc. I had another quick thought I was going to share on friendship. Oh, if you are in the presence of another person and that person is not responding to you as though you are bad, mm-hmm. if you are visible to someone and they are not getting angry or upset or scared, treating you like you're a monster or you're terrible or whatever, then you'll feel better. The more that you are vulnerable with that person, the more visible you are to them, and they're still not reacting in any of those ways, the better you'll feel at a faster rate. Mm-hmm. This is going to sound like super oversimplified, but I'm pretty confident at this point. If you have a conversation, if you just talk out loud, authentically with another person who is listening to you and also talking authentically with you, including saying things that you might not want the other, that they might think you wouldn't like or whatever, but they say it anyway, mm-hmm. you will feel better. If you don't, you will feel worse. Thinking, especially doing the like fakey social interaction where I'm imagining what social interaction would go like in my head, mm-hmm. it'll get worse and worse and worse as time goes on. Mm-hmm. Talking with someone, you'll feel better and better and better as time goes on.
And that's why everyone watching this stream should come get therapy at Effective.
It's part of why therapy works. Yeah. Therapists like to pretend, we like to tell ourselves that we know secret special information. We work very hard here to abolish that idea that we have secret knowledge that makes us better at life than other people.
Yeah, I'm not an oracle.
Mostly therapists it's the theory, it's the analysis. But I think at the root of it, it's just someone to talk to, mm-hmm. to tell all the things that you're worried might make someone hate you or judge you or fear you, mm-hmm. and they don't respond that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of like if you're afraid of if you go outside, you will. It's like exposure therapy.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of people who will poo-poo therapy by saying something like, "Oh, it's just someone to talk to." It's like, well,
that's unimportant. Yeah. And hopefully, for anybody who's saying that, it is unimportant to them because they have people to talk to.
Because I can think of that specific person who has a great support system.
Therapy is different than talking to friends and other things, mm-hmm. but that doesn't mean that everyone. I don't like the idea of anyone needing therapy. It's the same as needing personal training or
I'm careful with that too with clients when they're like, oh, if my partner only went to therapy then everything would be fixed, and they don't say it exactly that way, but it's like there are other ways of being less miserable than
a lot of times people take it as a sign of a willingness. You know, I'm
yeah.
going to therapy. See, I'm willing to change.
Even if I act the exact same for the next year.
Which is, you know, it is an indication of willingness, because if nothing else, I've made the change of going to therapy. It's just that has a certain signifier in our culture as like, see, this person's trying to change. There are many ways to try to change. I think therapy is beneficial. Therapy, which is a good fit for a person, right, is beneficial for anyone and everyone. I don't think it is a binary of it's necessary for some people, but other people don't need it.
Yeah.
Just like I think having a dietitian would be beneficial for anyone. And yeah, resources and all that.
Well, and it reminds, okay.
No,
that's another tangent.
We'll wrap up.
Okay. The thing I thought of is, it reminds me of clients who say, you know, how long do you think we should work together? And I'll say something like, for as long as this relationship is useful to you. And for some people, that's whatever, in perpetuity. And then for other people, it's like, I came here to work on this thing. We worked on it. There you go.
I have a slight modification of that. I like it. And I think you're saying the same thing I'm saying. I just have slightly different language, where I'll say, help is always helpful. You know, like, if you're doing something that helps you, it's unlikely that thing will ever stop being helpful to you.
Yeah.
But there's also a cost associated with the value, not just in terms of the money, but the time and the energy and the attention. You know, you pay a cost to access that help.
And for clients, like the recovery time too.
Sure.
Like, if I do therapy on a Thursday night, I'm not going to do this or whatever.
Yeah, depending on what's happening. So it's not that it will ever stop being helpful. It's not even that it'll ever become less helpful. In fact, therapy generally becomes more helpful as time goes on, and you and the therapist and the client get to know each other better. But the other things in your life, especially if therapy is helpful to you, are changing in such a way that other priorities are going to be, at some point, you would rather spend the cost that you're spending on therapy on something else. Yeah. It doesn't have to be an evaluation of therapy is no longer useful or helpful or necessary or whatever. It's just, sure, it's helpful.
Yeah, and that is what I'm saying, but I think in a less specific way, and I totally agree with you.
You know, accomplishment equation, separating out value and cost. You know. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
This was fun.
Yeah, I liked it.
Thank you, everybody who was here. We'll be here same time next week. The week after that, I won't be here because I'm traveling, but maybe you and Marie will do it. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe I can loop Amy in. That would be fun.
Yeah. But we will definitely be here next week. Thank you. And yeah.
Thank you.